Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.
Hello and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney.
And I'm Craig Freeman. The National Day of Prayer, a fixture since President Truman proclaimed it 58 years ago, faces extinction after a court decision last month. A U.S. district judge ruled that the federal law that declares the presidential proclamation and observance violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. While the White House is appealing the ruling, the case highlights the fragile balance between the practice and promotion of religion when the government is involved.
Well, from the church to the Capitol, religion plays an important part in the private and public lives of Louisiana citizens. The relationship here between church and state has been a close one. Local government boundaries date back to church-parish divisions. And where else in the country is Mardi Gras, the Catholics' last hurrah before Lent, a state holiday? Tonight we explore what role religion does and should play in Louisiana's public life, and where the lines blur between church and the Bayou state.
Throughout Louisiana history, faith has played an intricate part in shaping the character and culture of the Bayou state.
I think the role of religion in Louisiana has been uncommonly important from the early days of the Acadians down to the present.
Dr. Ellis Sandoz is the Moyes Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Louisiana State University.
The Acadian culture that came here under great duress has maintained its devoutness in Catholicism in a way which is really extraordinary. So there's that solid block which is unique to the country. In the other part of the state, you have a equally vehement evangelical array of denominations, high church attendance. People take these things seriously.
So seriously that a survey by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life ranks Louisiana as the nation's fourth most religious state. The ranking is based on how respondents rated the importance of religion in their lives, their belief in God, and frequency of prayer and attendance at services. Dr. Sandoz notes that this religious fervor oftentimes spills over into the governmental arena.
We have daily prayers in both houses of the state legislature conducted by local pastors or by members that are called on to do so. And the notion is that we are a nation under God, as the motto says, even though we don't like to get too particular about who this God is and exactly which denomination he or she may belong to.
So what should the relationship between church and state be? Our nation's founders attempted to clarify it in the beginning of the Bill of Rights.
The First Amendment to the United States Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
Barbara Forrest is a professor of philosophy at Southeastern Louisiana University. She also serves on the Board of Trustees of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Forrest says that the Establishment Clause puts up a legal wall between faith and government.
Every person is free to worship or not worship as the conscience dictates. But in return for that, religious people agree that their views will not be given government sanction as public policy. Every person has the right to be free from religion.
The First Amendment was clearly to keep the government out of the business of religion, not to keep the religion out of the business of government.
Tony Perkins is a former state representative and current president of the Family Research Council. The conservative Christian organization is dedicated to the promotion of marriage, family, and the sanctity of life in national policy.
The idea that people of faith should be excluded or should somehow leave their faith at the door before they engage in the process is clearly out of keeping with what the founders envisioned and how this country has operated for the majority of its time as a country.
Determining what the founders envisioned as the ideal religion and government relationship has fallen on the courts. 3 Supreme Court rulings, including 2 over Louisiana cases, have allowed the use of taxpayer money to cover supplies and even tuition in religious schools. But a federal court threw out an abstinence-only sex education program started under Governor Mike Foster because it used tax funds for religious skits and radio programs. And in the area of school-sponsored prayer, the law has moved toward increased separation between religion and the government. The ACLU has filed 7 lawsuits over the years against the Tangipahoa Parish School Board, several involving the issue of prayer.
It's been ridiculous because what it does, it really infringes upon now our freedom of speech rights, that religion is not to be censored by the government.
Pastor Louis Husser heads CrossGATE Church located in Tangipahoa Parish. He is hopeful that the Preservation of Religious Freedom Act, working its way through the current Louisiana legislature, will reestablish a wall of protection for religious expression.
This bill, as it's introduced, is going to redefine the fact that our liberties as a religious people should never be infringed on or limited by the government.
Husser believes people of faith are needed to ensure that Judeo-Christian values are involved in the political process.
Our views are the same views of our founding fathers that held a lot of weight, blessed this nation, gave us a great foundation of a Constitution. So a lot of the Constitution is not so much an atheist worldview as much as it is a biblical worldview.
But a Louisiana law requiring that the biblical view of creation be given equal treatment with the teaching of evolution was ruled unconstitutional in 1987. The Supreme Court found that it specifically intended to advance a particular religion.
So there's really a balance there, a fine line that needs to be walked.
Rob Tassman is Associate Director of the Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops. Tassman acknowledges the delicate boundary between church and state goals, but sees faith-based initiative partnerships as a win-win situation.
I think that's how you walk the fine line and at the same time are able to serve the greatest needs in the community with the involvement of both the religious communities and government aid as well.
The initiative program, started during President George W. Bush's first term, survived a 2007 Supreme Court challenge by the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
It's appropriate in this separation of church and state to have interaction as well as separation.
Reverend Phil Woodland is Minister of Visitation with University United Methodist Church. Woodland feels that no matter where the church-state boundary is, social justice demands that believers have their voices heard.
If people of faith are only concerned about their own growth and their own congregation, then we miss that calling of God to be a part of establishing a peace on earth, and where children don't go to bed hungry when there's plenty of food around. And if we let our voices be muted, then that voice of conscience, that voice of God will not be heard as a part of the political process.
Joining me to let their voices be heard are our audience members. They include Baton Rouge area residents who were randomly recruited and surveyed for us by LSU's Public Policy Research Lab. We also have 2 members of the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. Of those who responded to our pre-show survey questions about their position on social issues, 50% identify themselves as conservative, 39% as liberal, and 20% as moderate. On the issue of the role of religion in public education, an overwhelming majority of respondents, 82%, support prayer in public schools, 15% oppose it, and 3% were unsure. A total of 67% of those surveyed agree or strongly agree that creationism, the religious belief that humanity and the universe are the product of a supernatural entity, should be taught in public schools. A total of 20% disagree or strongly disagree. When asked their opinion on the separation between church and state in Louisiana, 56% say there is not a clear separation. 38% feel that there is. So let's start there. is the line between government and religion being crossed in the state, and where exactly should the line be? Are we crossing the line? Is religion intruding into government? Is government intruding into religion in Louisiana? Troy?
I'd say, is there really an issue with religion crossing over into government? I think we heard from that video. That's kind of what the Founding Fathers did. If you read the initial Declaration of Independence, it talks about God in that. So the idea that as Christians we're not allowed to participate in government, I think that's a fallacy.
Are we a Christian nation?
We do not have a Christian government.
We've certainly become a religious country, but we certainly weren't founded on religion.
I would disagree, because the Declaration of Independence said all of our rights do come from God, and the Declaration of Independence predates the Constitution. And you don't start things in a vacuum. That there's no such thing as neutrality. I mean, we vote for moral men to make moral decisions for us, and everything is a moral decision. Taxes, environment, these are all moral questions that we have to ask in ourselves.
Julia, I saw you nodding your head. You agree?
Well, I do think that this country was founded on the basis of Christianity, the Ten Commandments, moral values. But I don't necessarily it was founded for Christianity. I mean, this is a equal community for all religions. We founded this nation for people to come here to escape religious persecution. It was for Christians, yes, but to make sure that they weren't persecuted for their religious beliefs. So no, it wasn't necessarily for Christians alone.
Hannah, I heard you agree.
I would agree on the principle that though there are a lot of Christian beliefs or Judeo values incorporated into our Constitution, it's not just specifically for Christian people. I think when you question the separation between church and state, does church just mean Christian churches that identify with the Bible or Judeo-Christian values, or does it include the beliefs or faiths of all people? Because all people have a religion or faith of some sort, and to say that anyone could make decisions apart from that, I believe is the biggest fallacy.
So now, at the end, you said a little bit that threw me a little. I think you're saying that we all use these same values.
Right. Well, not necessarily that everyone agrees on every point, but none of us can completely separate ourselves from whatever faith or worldview that incorporates the beliefs or the decisions that we make. And though I don't believe that church should manage the affairs of the state or the state should manage the affairs of the church, I think anyone's opinion should be able to be included.
James, you agree?
Yes, I agree with her. I think it's separate but the same in some ways, because like Ms. Julia was saying, the church and the state really was built on what this country is built on, the same thing. Spirituality deals with our laws today. That's what we are being governed by, It's really spirituality, and we must keep that in mind, that in order to follow the laws of the state, we must follow the laws of the church as well, which is two in the same, you see. There's no difference from the two, really.
Now, what happens if, should churches be allowed to endorse candidates? Should churches be able to get money to educate students on a particular issue? Leo?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
That's okay?
Possible. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so if I'm there on Sunday and the pastor says, I want you to vote for Mayor Billy, then that's all right with us.
Yes, but certainly religion plays a part in everyone's role. There's no way anyone could step into a poll nowadays without having some kind of moral religious platform view. There's no way. However, it's this intent. It's the nature of how religion's being used. I don't want to be tricked into believing that someone's religious and they're using it as their platform.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a little bit of Kalpana.
I find it paradoxical here. When you're talking about separation of church and state, but at the same time you're expecting to make laws based on religious beliefs. And I don't think you can legislate morality or ethics. It is something very personal and spiritual.
And so how do we do it? How do we legislate morality? Tony?
Well, first of all, our founding fathers were Freemasons.
They didn't base this on Christianity. The wall between Christians or religions and government should stay apart. If you bust that wall down, you're opening up a whole new can of worms to kill religion and take religion out of the United States, because the government could step in and take it out.
Guy, you agree or disagree?
I believe that our forefathers, they said, even on our money that's printed, it says, "In God we trust." So that's something that we cannot get away from. And I believe that the United States, we've been protected because of our faith-based initiatives that we've had all throughout history. And I think that's why we've had a covering, so to speak. And I think now we're getting away from it and trying to say, well, we don't want this on courthouse buildings, we don't want this on monuments. And then you get into what we have today, and everybody's just, I think there is a way that we can coexist. I believe that we can certainly coexist.
But is this a theocracy? Or, I mean, you know, is this a situation where we want to have Christian beliefs dominate, I guess, the way we make laws, Ben?
No, you don't want one religion to dominate your government. I mean, this is United States. It's not Iran. Okay, the church laws are not the state laws. They're totally separate. They should be.
Okay, buddy.
You know, I think the church has to be the moral voice, and people talk about this wall of separation. The wall of separation that Jefferson referred to was to protect the church. And then you go back, well, you can't legislate morality. Well, as I said earlier, everything is a moral decision. Sure. I mean, we elect moral people to make those. I mean, killing comes from, you know, God's law, thou shalt not kill. Right. So again, there's nothing neutral. And then we go into these with our preconceived backgrounds, with our biases, and, you know, we're voting for people that we perceive as moral people. Now, I go back, I don't think that a church should say you should vote for John, Joe, and Jimmy, but I think the church has the obligation to say, this is a type of man or woman that you should vote for.
Right. Yep. Well, can we get a shared sense of morals by teaching kids some good prayers in school and, you know, in third grade? I mean, if we all get to the same place.
Well, this is why I'm opposed to government education. I think that education is indoctrination by mere definition, and it should be something that left to the family and to the church. And I would rather see a voucher system and get rid of the failed system that we have now as government schools.
What about prayer in school? Norvell, do you think it's all right for us to teach kids a couple of prayers in first or second grade?
You know, it should. When I started school, that was the norm. It was normal to pray and to get my day started off right. And if you really look at statistics, now it's just getting worse and worse because we're taking things away from the schools, and it's just a big fight against religion. And if you look like in the beginning, it's what we were founded on. Right. And if you take that away, it only starts to crumble.
What about sex education? You know, should we teach? There's a bill in the legislature right now that talks about sex education for 4th through 12th grade. Mallory, is that the kind of thing that we want to have in schools, to let teachers talk about some of these moral values that we have?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what they would be teaching to 4th graders. I think if it's the same thing I learned in 7th grade, I don't think I should be learning that in 4th grade. I think that we should keep that away from kids as long as possible. But I also don't agree that it should just be abstinence only. And I'm a person of faith, but I didn't think that learning safe sex really affected my abstinent choice. I think it's a personal choice, and other kids that aren't brought up in church may not have that choice, but it's good that they learn a smarter way.
Sorry, I think too that though I don't think the government should be regulating what kids can or can't learn, like, well, you have to pray this way or everyone absolutely has to learn this thing. I think parents should be given the option, especially if it's going to be taught to the younger grades, to be able to pull their kids out or to be able to at least have an opinion on what they're being taught. And at the same time, though, I don't think prayer should be mandated for every person to pray the same way. I think students should be given the opportunity, if they want to pray, to have that express freedom of their own.
Well, what about things like creationism and evolution? I mean, do we teach all those things in school? And I know, Buddy, maybe we don't teach any of those things
well,
individual schools.
I go back that, you know, that these are the problems with the government school. You know, that you see something as benign as teaching intelligent design that, you know, teachers are getting fired, losing tenure over. And that's why I think that, you know, our system is so broken that we ought to maybe go towards more of a European system that supports church schools, home schools, co-ops, and I think vouchers are a great way to do it, and that gets that. So if you have a co-op school and they say that we're just going to be completely no prayers? Well, that's great. You have a church school, a Presbyterian school like I have. You can teach the Westminster Confession. That's great. But you don't blur the lines between government and public education.
Look, Ben, look like you disagreed a little bit.
Yes. The voucher system means giving government money to whatever school you're setting up. Okay? Like prayer in school, you cannot say you have to pray this way. Right? If you want to say a silent prayer, you can have silent prayer. And it's up to you if you want to, if you don't want to. Now, it's just with the vouchers, Mr. Buddy is against government schools, but it's still getting government money going somewhere. Education costs money.
And we pay a lot of taxes.
Right.
Yeah.
So money's going somewhere.
I'd say all these issues, you can't see the forest for the trees, all these issues, evolution versus creationism, sex education, those are the trees. The real question is it harmful to have God in our society? That's really the ultimate question.
Right.
And there is a push to say we shouldn't have God in our society.
Right.
And without God, my God is the Christian God. Without God, there is no morality. Without morality, there is no society.
Right.
God.
Yeah, I think without God, you have the moral deterioration is what we have today. That's because we've taken God out of everything, and that's thus what we have. We have total just chaos in schools.
Alex?
I have to play the devil's advocate. Certainly our state is demographically Catholic and Protestant, but every door that you seem to open up, or a politician or a figure would open up for religious freedom, we need to make really sure that it doesn't close doors for other people, because our demographics are changing without a doubt. It's not just Louisiana, there's outside of Louisiana people coming in.
I'm going back, because in India, where I was educated, there is multi-religious. I went to a private school, and every day we had 3 or 4 prayers related to all the religion. You may call God, I may call Bhagwan, you may call Allah. Everything is the one. So why make a big deal about it?
Well, we need to make a little bit of a deal about it with our panelists coming up. And so when we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to further discuss church in the Bayou State. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. We're discussing the relationship between religion and government in Louisiana. Joining us now is our panel of experts. Pastor Leo Cyrus serves as spiritual leader for both New Hope Baptist Church and Second Baptist Church in Baton Rouge. Pastor Cyrus is a former member of the Federation of Churches and Synagogues and the East Baton Rouge Parish School Board. Bishop Michael Jarrell leads the Roman Catholic Diocese of Lafayette. Bishop Jarrell is a member of both the United States and Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops and is a past president of the Louisiana Interchurch Conference. Reverend Welton Gaddy heads the national nonpartisan grassroots organization Interfaith Alliance and serves as pastor at Northminster Baptist Church in Monroe. Reverend Gaddy's past leadership roles include president of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Ken Ward is the executive director of the Louisiana Moral and Civic Foundation, or LMCF. The LMCF educates people of all faiths on how to make a better Louisiana. Dr. Ward also serves as ethicist and coordinator of chaplain services for the state legislature. Let's go to our participants for their questions. And Alex, I think you had a question to get us started.
Thank you, Craig. We represent many different religions and morality beliefs in Louisiana, we as a group here. What do you guys, and this is very generic, but what do you guys feel about the religion and the political process?
I think religion in this nation has made its greatest contributions when it acted like religion, not like a political bloc. We have a lot of places in this nation where we do politics. The institutions of religion in this nation have served us best when they've called us to our higher consciousness, not to when they've taken partisan political positions. That's one reason the IRS and the election laws have prohibited churches from endorsing candidates, so that all parishioners in all kinds of houses of worship have access to religious education, spiritual enrichment, without getting caught up in the conflict of partisan politics.
Pastor, so you're nodding your head. Do you agree some or disagree some?
No, I agree totally.
what he said.
And Bishop or Dr. Wolf?
I never agree totally with even my wife. I think the points are well made, and I think that this group has expressed itself very well and have raised the issues that all of us cope with and try to address the best way that we can. In my opinion, I think we always need to be careful when we talk about the institution of the church and the institution of state. Of course, both people or both institutions are the same people who make up these, that make up the church, that make up the state. I think both the word moral and ethics have to do with a sense of worth, a sense of doing the thing that we feel that we ought to do. So I think that we'll continue to struggle and discover for ourselves those things that, for instance, that we do in schools and the things that we do in our legislators. We've got to address each of them, in my opinion, separately. And I think personally that there's not going to be one thing that anybody says on this panel or from the group that says, hey, that's the answer, and that's what we need all to begin to do. I think prayerfully and diligently we need to work and seek for our nation and for the citizens of our nation what works best for all of us.
As Reverend Gaddy stated, I think it's important for the churches to speak out on issues, and I think they do so very forcefully, and I think that's very appropriate. Partisan politics, however, I think is outside the realm of the churches, and we do a disservice if we get too involved in political races and candidates and partisan politics. And it may be worth making the point that some people say the church can't endorse politicians. The church can endorse politicians, but it can no longer claim exemption from taxes if it does that. If it wants to change its character, it can do that, but it can't do that and be treated as a charitable organization.
But even beyond, if I can extend on the thoughts there, there are specific rules that allow, for instance, a church to invite candidates for a public office. All of the candidates must be invited. Carefully, the questions that are asked should not be designed to sort of get a particular candidate to express themselves as a candidate they are comfortable with. And I think here again is an example that the institution of the church and the institution of politics, and politics is an institution, instead of using so much energy and so much time in trying to persuade the other, I think we need to seek solutions of how the church and the state can exist and can enhance the role of each.
I think on the point of endorsing a candidate, that church shouldn't get involved in that, because you have Democrats and Republicans in the same congregation. So you're dividing your congregation. So it's best to encourage your congregation to get involved in the politics, because there's no way in the world we can live in this society and not be involved in politics. Because,
And James, you had a question kind of talking about not dividing in mega churches.
Yes, yeah, and that's why I want to ask good evening, gentlemen, first of all. I want to ask a question about how do you feel about a personal question about sex in the schools? How do y'all feel about that?
Do we need that education? Do we need sex education in all schools?
The difficulty is in the details. To say sex education is a broad thing. There are all sorts of programs. So the real difficulty comes in deciding what exactly that means. And I think there's great difficulty if you cannot include the moral and religious dimension. I think that presents a real challenge. I don't have any difference of opinion with that. I think there are many people who say that sex education ought to take place in the home, not in the school. You know and I know that there are plenty of homes where sex is never discussed. Yes. And if quality education is an education for life, then sex is a very important part of life. And I would agree with the bishop that there are certain principles, and they are a part of most every religion, not just Christianity or Judaism. They're in Islam, they're in the Sikh religion, they're in the Buddhist religion, that there is a proper way to experience sex, and it has to do with fidelity and respect and dignity and all of those. So those are certainly principles that should accompany that kind of education. Yes, sir.
Well, and Guy, you also had some questions not related to sex education, but more kind of the changing morals in Louisiana.
Yeah, this being the Bible Belt, do you feel that we've become a society that is more tolerant of alternative lifestyles, be it lesbian lifestyles, homosexual lifestyles, and I use that as I have a family member that has that, and I just believe if are we turned away from what the Bible says, not what Pastor Cyrus says or Reverend from the Catholic Diocese. Have we turned away from the Bible to be more tolerant because we don't want to offend anybody, and we want more membership, and maybe we just don't want to. We don't want to say what the Bible says. We just want to kind of just tiptoe around certain things.
It sounds like you're dealing with the teaching and preaching of the church, and certainly we are in agreement with what the Bible says. But keep in mind, individuals, have their own beliefs and doing their own things. In my congregation, that is taught. And we believe in the Bible. We don't deviate from the Bible, even though society has accepted this as a way of life. As a pastor of my church, my stance is God says it's wrong. And so, regrettably, the people that need to hear that doesn't attend church.
But it also makes a difference which part of the Bible you talk about. I want to answer your first question first. I think in the Bible Belt, we're seeing two things happen. I think we're seeing a polarization between those who are a real part of the religious community and those who are not a part of any religious community. And then also you're seeing real intolerance for people of different faiths, which is a contradiction, in my opinion, not in everybody's, but in my opinion, to what I read in Scripture. So when you ask me as a Baptist pastor, what do I think? I think we ought to be more than tolerant of people who are different. And I have to go back to Jesus, who said, come unto me, all you who labor and heavy laden. All of you. Sure. All of you. So I think inclusion is at the heart of my Christian faith, and so is the responsibility to protect the freedom of other people, because if they don't have the freedom for their faith or non-faith, the time can come when we don't have the freedom for ours.
And the Bishop and Doctor, I'd like to answer, but I think, Pastor, you want to...
I just want to come back and say this.
Good deal.
Because we don't exclude them. I want to clear that up.
Right,
they are invited.
Sure.
God
hates the sin, not the sinner.
Right. So we invite them to come, but to condone it or to act as if it is permissible, no.
Going off of what you have all just said, I know there have been certain legislation passed recently, both in the state and just in the federal Congress, having to do with different levels of discrimination, and some pastors have feared that it would infringe upon their rights to even say what they believe on the subject. So not just, I personally believe that all parties should have the freedom of speech, freedom of practice without being prohibited against. So do y'all feel that you are prohibited against preaching against what you believe, or do you believe the church should be allowed to at least say what they believe, even if they're not directly telling someone you have to live this way?
I don't know of a piece of legislation that has been passed that denies free speech to anyone. The piece of legislation that comes to mind is the hate crimes legislation, and there was a lot of opposition to the hate crimes legislation because the word was put out that it would deny your free speech in the pulpit and you couldn't, and actually the major concern was homosexuality, and pastors were told you can't condemn homosexuality if this law passes. That was not true. That law protected free speech. As I had a conversation with a lot of pastors about that law, and what you cannot do from the pulpit is say that you think that someone is so wrong they ought to be killed or they ought to be eliminated. That violates that law. But if you want to say that you have a hatred or whatever for homosexuals, or you think they ought to be pushed to the periphery of society, you're free to say that.
But the problem runs into, though, our neighbors to the north of us in Canada has strict hate crimes on there that pastors can be convicted for, speaking out and saying what the Bible says, saying what God says about homosexuals.
We don't.
Well, we don't. But I'm saying, though, if we go down that path, we could end up like Canada.
I'm not scared of that in a nation that prizes freedom like ours does.
Well, our brethren to the north of us, I think, has that same tradition that we have, and they're there right now.
We're not.
Well, we also had some questions about creationism. I know as we're talking about some of the policies in school.
I think our tradition, the Catholic tradition, has long ago made peace with the idea of evolution and science. We believe that God is one and that truth is one, and that the scientific truth agrees with the religious truth. Now, that's the principle. How it works out in details is much more challenging. But I would say about evolution is that there are several different variations, and some of them are not acceptable to the Catholic tradition, and I believe to the others as well. If they do not accept a creator, then it would be objectionable. But there are some forms of evolution that are open to the idea of a creator.
Just being a student, I haven't been in the public school system. I've actually been homeschooled, but I've been able to study both sides of the issue. And it seems to be presented to me, and do you agree that both creator, scientific belief about our origins based on a creator, and evolution are both based on faith? Because we cannot repeat the experience where we were never there to observe it. And science, the way I learned it, was taught that it is based on observation. So would then both major beliefs be able to at least be discussed or presented as being theories, and that they're both accepted on faith, not necessarily legislating which one has to be taught or which one has to be believed?
See, I want to step back and ask, what is the purpose of education? The purpose of education, as I understand it, and I heard your comments from outside, and I respect what you're saying about, I don't agree with you. I'd like for the government to get out of the business of public education, because I think someone's going to get left out if that happens. But public education is not for indoctrination. It's for teaching you how to think. It's so that you can grow up in a diverse world and make decisions between various theories and various experiments and what's right and what's wrong in that regard. And the bishop spoke very clearly. A Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, there's no need to fear truth. I mean, when you see truth, you're going to grasp it. Now, if that is a major concern, and perhaps it was for your parents, and perhaps it is for people who go to private school, that's fine. But here is a great example of a family who has said, we've got to have public education in this country if we're going to have an educated democracy, but we also want some indoctrination for our kids, and if we do that, then we pay for doing it. Yes.
So Dr. Ward?
I was thinking about the answers, but I was also thinking about something that I used as an illustration. I heard somebody quoting somebody that said a young child or a young student said that it would take more faith for him to believe in scientific creationism than it would in the biblical point of view, as far as being how we developed and how we were created. With my family, again, here was an example, and I think perhaps you may be alluding to this. There comes a point. My wife and I were not particularly fond of our children, especially our young children, being orientated in evolution or something that we did not hold to be as truth in our faith. We saw in our minds that we could not expect public education to change what they were doing because of our personal faith and belief. So therefore, we made the choice, a sacrificial choice, to come out of public education and go to parochial schools.
Well, and I know, Julie, also, you had a question kind of about how do we balance that? And so how do we give morals?
I kind of have a question about that. My initial question was, how do you teach on ethics and moral values without imposing religious beliefs? And it does touch on this subject, and I think it's possible to teach on all the different ideas of creationism and evolutionism.
Can I respond? Because I think sometimes there are misunderstandings about morality and ethics. Former Governor Edwards, I remember on one occasion, his wife had accepted like $10,000 from North Korea or from some foreign, and the discussion was that he should be fined for an ethics violation. And he rightly said, no, at the time that his wife took the $10,000, it was not against the law. Therefore, she had not created an ethics violation. Now, ethics can be changed with a majority vote. Ethics has to do with the sense of oughtness. For instance, in any given body, there's a set of ethics that they have agreed to vote on and that they've agreed to conduct their business by. Now, morality, and I think our pastors would say amen to this, if that's still an appropriate response, that morality cannot be changed by a vote. In other words, there's a scripture or there is a faith that we hold our moral values originating from, and we learn those moral values. And whether we adhere to them or not, they're still moral values. And to me, that's the difference in ethics and morality, and that may not have been your question.
But what about cultural beliefs?
Or the perception of morality is
absolutely.
That can be changed.
Well, and again, morality, if in fact moralities are based on absolutes, now then by definition of that, no, they're not changed. Now, our
unless you remove the absolute,
our embracing them and our living by them can change. But if something is a moral absolute, it doesn't change by a lifting of the hands. On the other hand, ethics, it does. We can lift our hands and decide what do we agree to do in this discussion. Well, they tell us, and we say, okay, I agree to do that. That's what we ought to do.
And I think you also had some other hands lifted. It looked like you guys wanted to chime in.
No, not on this issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kalpana, I knew you also had a question.
It's not a question, but what is my observation that ethics is more like a theoretical concept. It has to be practiced. And children first know how your parents or surrounding, how you practice it. And then religion would come in and reinforce that. What
ethics, in one tradition, has to do with what comes from reason, simply from not counting revelation from God or the scriptures. Ethics is what human beings, the Greek philosophers and Roman philosophers, produced ethical principles simply based on human reason and observation of human behavior and the life of the city, of the society. Morality can be both from reason or from revelation, so it would be both. But ethics, I think there are principles that are generally agreed upon, but it's based on reason, so there can be some different views of it, yes.
And George, I know you also had a question about, on one hand we talk about giving our children morals, but you expressed some concern about how that affects children.
Well, I feel that a child, if there were prayer in the school, for example, I don't know if there is anybody on this panel that's in favor of prayer in the public schools, but how would you justify this to the child who does not participate and might as well have a sign on his back that says "kick me"? Because grade school children in particular will really persecute their fellow classmates because they're different. And to me, that's one reason in the public schools, no one should know what somebody else's religion is. And as soon as you put public prayer in the school, everybody knows what you are to some extent.
I think they could each express their own religion, but have also an attitude of tolerance. Sure. Because I think what you've just described is that the one is, controlling what everybody else is doing. Mm-hmm. And I've thought for many years about prayer in the public schools and tried to see arguments on both sides. And I've fantasized often, and this is just, I'll put it out there for discussion, that if it were left on the local level, I think it could be approached much better. When you look at the national level, where you're talking about schools in New York City and you're talking about schools in Baton Rouge, and they're different societies. So it may have its own problems, I understand, but I just wonder sometimes if it couldn't be better approached on the local level.
I think I come at it two ways. One, from a religious definition of prayer, which in private has more integrity, according to my religious tradition, than in public. And so you can't, I hear people say, we've just got prayer out of the schools, we've got God out of the schools. Not the God I believe in. You don't throw that God out. And you don't throw prayer out. Because any time someone in school says, God help me on this, there's been a prayer. We now live in the most religiously diverse nation in the world. That's not just over there somewhere. My wife, substitute, taught in Monroe, Louisiana. One day in an assembly, someone was imposing a Christian prayer. Every head bowed, every eye closed. And she happened to notice the little girl next to her was not closing her eyes, and she was fidgeting. And she turned to her and said, aren't you going to bow your head? And she said, no, I don't believe in this kind of prayer. And my wife said, okay, I'm going to sit here with my eyes open too, because I want to be with you. We don't want to impose that on you. If what you're talking about, and I think that's why the Supreme Court said that a moment of silence is fine. My experience is that most people who really press for public prayer in the classroom are more interested in witness about their religion than they are in the offering of a prayer. Mm.
Well, in my high school, I'd say that I'm going to go to a public high school, and I'm a person of faith. I'm not sure exactly where y'all are talking the prayer in school would be. I mean, in my high school, we're very busy. There's not really any time to pray, but there's a choice if you want to join. There's a club for Christianity, and before school and at recess we have prayer, and it's not, if any other religion wanted to make a club, they could do that too. Like, I'm a part of the Christian club, and before school we say a prayer, and at recess we have meetings every week. And it's not imposing on anyone.
Do you still gather around the flagpole?
Yes, sir, but it's not around the flagpole, actually. Yeah. It's just in the quad.
Yeah. How would you all feel if they passed a law and bring the prayers back in school?
I would oppose it with every ounce of energy that I have. And let me say, it is because I am a person of faith. It's not because I'm not. Because I don't want anybody telling me how to pray and what to say when I pray. I don't want President Obama telling me that, and I don't want the principal of my local school telling me that. If I'm going to pray, I want it to be an authentic prayer, and if it's authentic, it's my prayer.
Because I think a lot of the kids don't get prayers at home, but they can get it at school.
I think you're referring to organized group praying?
Yes.
And I think, personally believe, if it's permitted, organized group praying, well, that's something really we should be against. Now, if there's, just say I walked in and say, well, let's pray. You have the option to pray or not to pray, or pray the way you want to pray. But I am against organized group praying. I don't think you'll have
Dr.
that.
Gaddy, I have a question
Okay.
for you, going back to the creationism. Are you opposed of any type of theist type of teaching of intelligent design in a biology class?
I have found that that's a trick question. No, I know, I'm not accusing you of that. But what I'm saying is it usually is a question saying, is it all right in the classroom to teach about the sovereignty and creativity of God and what comes from that? I personally don't, as I said, I don't think you can kick God out of the classroom. I don't think you can understand American history without a spiritual presence and the way in which that present function. And by the way, I'm going to put a parenthesis and say, Tony Perkins said it, one of y'all said it, that the First Amendment was just in order to keep government out of religion, not religion out of government. That's just not the case. It was meant both ways. But in school, I want, as the bishop said, I want kids taught scientific method that gives them the ability to think through it for themselves. And I think if we teach science correctly, a person of faith or a person looking about faith has the equipment then to make a good decision about creation. And as you well said, people who believe in evolution also believe in God's creativity. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive in that way.
I think in some way, being able to study both beliefs, it's not necessarily that in schools they would have to teach that creation is necessarily true, but just this is how they look at the scientific evidence, this is how they look at scientific evidence, because some people dispute over whether scientific evidence pointing to evolution is actually evidence. And as I've been able to study both sides of my home and my education, that is what has helped me think through everything, not just studying one side and then saying, well, this is the way you have to think through it. Because studying both sides is what gives me the ability to compare and contrast and think through things.
And Dr. Gaddy, I mean, what you're saying basically is that a teacher can be neutral. I can tell you there's no such thing as neutrality. I mean that a radical evolutionist is just as religious as a fundamentalist. In fact, he is fundamentalist towards his views. So, I mean, you know, and what we have seen in our nation now, especially on the college level, where teachers, professors have lost tenure by just mentioning the possibility of maybe there might possibly be some type of intelligent design. That's, to me, I think that violates the freedom of speech of a teacher has in the classroom.
I think what kind of goes back to one of the questions you asked earlier, or statements you made earlier, is that the amount of intolerance among one belief towards the other. And I think that, my question was, how do you define that? Because I think that kind of goes both ways. We mentioned college professors. I had one jump down my throat at Louisiana Tech University because I believed in creationism and I needed to get out of his class.
There's no place for
right.
that.
So how in terms of you said there's an intolerance. How do you define intolerance in terms of Christianity versus
an ability? And I'm glad you asked the question, because in our nation, if we don't recover this, we're going to lose our nation.
Sure.
And by that I mean, I disagree with Buddy. I disagree with Buddy, but I would defend his right to believe what he believes with all of my strength. And I want mutual respect. That's what I mean by tolerance. I work in an organization that works with 75 different religions. I am a Christian. I have my beliefs as a Christian, but I can relate to those people with respect. And what's kept our nation free and without the kind of sectarian conflict that you see in almost every other sector of the globe is a commitment to religious freedom that says no one can push religion down anybody else's throat. You do have a right to believe or not believe as you wish. And given that kind of relationship of mutual respect and cooperation, we've molded a great nation. Freedom is religion's best friend.
Well, unfortunately, the time is not our friend, and the clock says we've got to go. But we want to thank that's right. But we want to thank our panelists, Pastor Cyrus, Bishop Jarrell, Reverend Gaddy, and Dr. Ward. When we come back, we'll have a few closing comments.
Well, we're just getting going.
We are.
A lot of topics we could have added on to, I think.
I was going to say, I thought there were a couple of things that I thought we were going to talk about, but sometimes we run out of time. And so.
I know, we were talking about should I be forced to wear a burqa, not wear a burqa, all kinds of interesting things that are going on in the world today. Exactly. But I think we certainly have a smart group in the panelists and audience members, and that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to take this month's survey on religion in Louisiana by visiting us at lpb.org/public square. While you're there, click on the Be in the Audience link to be considered for a future show. We'd also love to get your feedback on tonight's topic. Post a comment like several viewers did following last month's show, Are Politics Destroying Democracy? Jean wrote, "Our political discourse has become dysfunctional. Our politicians are now always in campaign mode." Cliff laments that objective journalism of the political arena has all but disappeared. And Deborah notes, because we are supposed to be a representative republic, many citizens do not feel represented. The majority did not want the health care reform shoved at us, but we got it anyway. Well, Deborah, while the president has signed health care reform legislation into law, the debate continues. Louisiana is one of 14 states suing the federal government over the constitutionality of the bill.
And speaking of healthcare, the healthcare debate, next month, Louisiana Public Square will have an encore broadcast of healthcare reform, a Louisiana perspective. The program received the Louisiana State Medical Society's 2009 Award for Excellence in Medical Journalism. Revisit concerns and opinions that are still relevant today. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Good night, everyone.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org. Support for this program is provided by the men and women of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Through sustainable forestry, LFA members promote the health and productivity of Louisiana's forests for generations to come. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.